Hey, this is Mrs. Rouse. A couple of you let me know that the end of the fourth video, somehow the video stopped working, and then again, near the end of the fifth video. So I'm making this video to kind of talk you through a couple things that happened. Don't forget, you can always look on those papers I gave you where I have written up the information about the techniques. Now, near the end of the fourth video, I was working on painting on the markers, and I just wanted to show you, let me get this a little larger here, that you can either draw first or soften it up just with water, play around with it, or when you draw something with markers, let it dry and then add some paint. Anyway, it's a before or after. It depends on the technique you want, what you want to do, and so it's kind of fun to work with. I talked about something called streaking with a rag, and basically this is taking your paper towel and pushing the paint around. So you could be working with a wet into wet type of a technique, and I could be dabbing it, pushing it, or even probably wouldn't do it with salt, something like this or something like that. And so what I mean by, streaking with a rag is if you're doing clouds while it's really wet, you dab at it, push it around, maybe add some more color, dab at it, push it around, and that's definitely a technique. Now, some of your watercolor paper doesn't take a whole lot of a beating. This watercolor paper we're using right now is not as good as the other watercolor paper, so not so good. But nice watercolor paper is made for you to take a certain amount of beating, and then should anything start happening to your watercolor paper, if you see it tearing up a little bit or something, stop what you're doing, let it dry, and then see what you can do after. The other one I was talking about was striping brush, and there's some brushes shaped like this, or you can just take a normal brush and just press it between your fingers. So you could take a brush like this. I'm trying to hold it so you can see. Anyway, you dip in the paint and just kind of go like this. Some of my dry brush came out kind of like striping brush, but you can, it'll paint these even lines for you, so then you can turn it and paint like that. So like I said, my dry brush was similar to striping brush. It didn't get maybe as scratchy as some dry brush gets, but it's the same idea, painting with your bristles all spread out, either with a specialized brush or just pressing the brush between your fingers. And that's a great way to do grass and other types of things. So you can certainly do that. And I would say it's a pretty normal technique. Now, the other things you couldn't see is here with the charcoal. When I was working on that, I did some work where drawing with the charcoal first, and then I added some water, and it kind of blends and gets really dark and kind of cool, and I added some paint to it. But over here, I drew with the charcoal while the paper was wet, and it gets really, really dark, and it fills in, like you can see where the paper is dry and it looks like normal charcoal. Well, here the paper was wet. So kind of experimenting, I noticed that the large piece of charcoal that's kind of looser, the larger kind of square one you have, the biggest piece of charcoal you have, it's pretty dark and rich, and it's going to work a little bit easier if you're drawing with wet paper. As far as drawing first, it doesn't really matter which charcoal you want. You get a little bit more control with some of the other charcoals, but the bigger pieces of charcoal give you something more expressive. I would say most likely you would do this charcoal in something much larger, very expressive and very fun. So if you feel like just going nuts with a large piece of watercolor paper someday, try some charcoal. So the last one, I talked about it, but you didn't get to see it, so I'm going to make this larger, is here with the pencils. Basically, other types of paint. A painting that's acrylic or oil, if you see the actual pencil in the painting, that's considered a mistake. You shouldn't see the pencil by the time you get to the end of the painting. With a watercolor painting, since everything's transparent, you kind of want to leave a little trail behind you. It's considered okay. It's permissible for the original pencil lines to show. In fact, they don't even have to line up. I purposely kind of showed you, you know, the pencil lines and the paint don't always have to line up, and it just looks a little more loose and expressive. So typically when you see pencil in a watercolor drawing or painting, it would be just your graphite pencil, whichever pencil you happen to grab for. I would say probably your 2B, because your 2H might push down into the paper too hard. So you can see this. The lighter you draw, the more likely the graphite will just dissolve into the painting. You won't see it anymore. But if you have a few lines showing here and there, that's okay. As far as this snobby thing, some of the watercolor professional societies, graphite pencil's okay, but colored pencil is not okay. It's considered experimental. However, Mrs. Rouse says, in the meantime, any other type of art show, any other museum or whatever, just not the snobby watercolor ones. A colored pencil would be just fine. In fact, I love working in colored pencil. I'll often draw my paintings out with a light blue pencil because you can hardly see it. The colors are going to be natural. There's going to be some blue in there, and it mostly dissolves into the painting, but you can see some brown here and there. So I just kind of wanted you to draw probably first with some graphite pencil and some colored pencils, and kind of enjoy the just experimenting with the different colors, and then just do a loose painting. It doesn't have to be a little house in the woods. I just wanted to show pencils can show in watercolor painting. So that's all that one needs to be. I'm just going to add this up for a new video. Sorry that the other one's glitched out.